100 Soviet soldiers climbed a sacred mountain. 2 days later, they were all dead, torn apart by something that left not one footprint in the snow. The locals warned them not to go. They called it Death Mountain. The soldiers should have listened. I'm Karen Land. Welcome to the In-Between. Confession time again. I am somewhat globally, culturally challenged. Before today, this is about the only thing I knew about Finland. Wait, that's Iceland. See what I mean? But after hearing about this horrific incident that we're going to talk about today that occurred during World War II, I kind of see Finland in a whole new light. But let's step back for just a minute so you can see exactly how we got to where we are when this chilling event takes place. Okay, big picture. Before like 500 AD, Finland is home mostly to the Sami. But as the soon-to-be Finns move in from the east, they push the Samis to the north. But the Sami's influence on the eastern side of present-day Finland is already entrenched. The Finns, who decide to stay in the eastern region, take on a little bit of that Sami color into their culture and become their little own Finn flavor known as the Karelians, and form a territory known to this day as Karelia. Control of the Karelian region, which is between the eastern border of Finland and roughly the White Sea, has flip-flopped back and forth between its Scandinavian neighbors to the west and its Russian neighbors to the east several times. So by the time we get to 1939 and into World War II, the area is again in Russian territory. Now, at this time, Finland's border was just about 20 miles away from the Russian city of Leningrad, known today as St. Petersburg. That makes Stalin a little twitchy. He wanted a little more space for a buffer zone, but Finland pretty much says, screw you. So, on November 26, 1939, Stalin bombs a little Russian city called Mylia in Finnish, or Mylia in Russian. Anyway, point being, Stalin committed a false flag attack on his own people as an excuse to say,
they started it.
See? Finland is the aggressor and we must attack them. And 4 days later, on November 30th, that's what they did. And that is the start of what is now known as the Winter War. Stalin starts moving 450,000 troops, thousands of tanks, and a bunch of planes westward to face Finland, whose entire population is only like 3.7 million. So they pull together about 300,000, 350,000 troops, including all of their reservists. So Stalin totally thinks he's just going to plow straight through and claim victory in no time. Stalin is wrong. The outnumbered Finns approached the battle a lot like the Americans fought the British in the Revolutionary War. They didn't line up in the battlefield to walk straight into the slaughter. They employed guerrilla tactics that totally threw the British for a loop. And so did the Finns. They're all decked out in white camo, run around the forest that they know like the back of their hands on skis, which are way more quiet than tanks, by the way, and are better equipped to handle the minus 40 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. In Celsius, that's minus 40. Long story short, the Russians only equipped themselves for a cakewalk, not a slog. So now they're light on supplies, demoralized, and severely frostbitten. They need a break. They need to get a better vantage point so they can see the whole area better. They need Mount Vottovaara, Victory Mountain. Mount Vottovaara is not a huge mountain. It's only 1,369 feet at its highest, but considering the complete flatness of the rest of the area, it provides a commanding view of everything around it. It doesn't have a real peak like other mountains do. It's more like just a sloping plateau. Perfect, or so they thought. Mount Vottovaara is not your typical mountain. The Sami people who'd been in the area before they moved north regarded the mountain as a sacred site, a portal where the boundaries between worlds grew thin and spirits dwelled. Their animist beliefs held that every element of nature, from rocks and trees to animals and water, possessed a divine life force deserving of reverence, and rituals involving prayers and sacrifices were performed at the mountain to honor these entities and secure good fortune in hunts and migrations. And I can't say that I blame them. This is just one odd place. It looks like a place that needs a little appeasing occasionally. First of all, there are hundreds of these rock formations called Saidit. These are huge boulders, up to 10 tons, precariously balanced on top of smaller rocks. The conventional geologist wisdom is that they came from receding glaciers that just happened to deposit the rocks this way. Really? Maybe I need to visit there to rub some of that luck on me, because there are hundreds of these formations on the mountain. That's astronomically lucky. And the trees are completely messed up. Pine trees, some over 100 years old, are only 6 feet high, with trunks twisted and gnarled as if shaped by invisible forces. Not to mention the fact that the nearby lakes and ponds have no fish, plants, or anything else remotely alive. Wildlife, including insects and larger animals, avoid the area entirely, and the persistent, creepy mist all around is the frosting on the mountain cake. When Soviet officers talked to the locals about the mountain, the locals said,
"Don't even think about it, cowboy.
Don't even think about it. It's an evil place. And the spirits living in the Sadie do not look kindly on outsiders who fail to show the proper respect." The Soviet officers dismissed these warnings as archaic superstitions unfit for a modern army. And a company of 100 men from the Soviet 8th Army are ordered to climb the mountain and establish an observation post on the summit. Now, the Finns have been paying attention and know that the Soviets are going up the mountain, so they send a small crew to hide out not too far from the base of the mountain, just to keep an eye on what's going on. The Soviet soldiers make their way up through knee-deep snow under biting winds and arrive at the plateau after nightfall, where they quickly secure perimeter, pitch their tents in a central cluster, and begin digging observation slits oriented toward the Finnish lines several miles to the west. They radio headquarters to let them know that their position is secure, although the thick mist is blocking their view and forcing them to keep fires small to evade detection. Sentries patrol the edges, watching the tree line for any signs of enemy movement, and everyone settles into the cold, quiet night. But it doesn't stay quiet for long. Reports from after the fact by those brave enough to speak out or sane enough to remember talk about the night air turning thick and oppressive, making it physically hard to breathe, and a strange hum that no one can tell where it's coming from fills their ears. Then they see it. Finnish troops stationed in the valley below hear bursts of gunfire, the thud of grenade explosions, the barking of sometimes conflicting orders, and the screams of panic echoing from the peak. But it doesn't sound like a fight toward any particular side. It sounds more like the chaos is within the camp itself, rather than an assault on an outward enemy. From what they can understand from the short bursts of panic are hurried shouts about shadows darting around just at the edge of the light, too fast to be human. They hear the soldiers fire erratically into the darkness, their shots spraying in all directions as if targeting something in the mist itself that they can't see. As the hours wear on, the gunfire tapers off and the radio falls silent, leaving an eerie silence. According to witnesses, at dawn, the Russians take stock of what actually happened in the camp. As if by some miracle, after all the shooting and chaos, only one soldier is unaccounted for, his footprints trailing into the snow, only to end abruptly without explanation. The rest of the day passes uneventfully, but all 99 remaining men are at DEFCON 1 as the feeling of being watched by something malevolent and whispering coming from nowhere and everywhere intensifies throughout the day. As the sun starts to go down on the second night, the same hum they heard the night before returns, and the air once again thickens until it's physically hard for the soldiers to breathe. And once again, the shadows just beyond their vision move with deliberate purpose, too quick to track, but too intentional to dismiss as tricks of the light. Gunfire erupts again, more sustained and desperate, with grenades exploding in rapid succession and conflicting orders shouted amid the frenzy. Some ordering the soldiers to stand and fight, others a desperate plea for those who can to save themselves. At first light, a small team of Finnish scouts advances up the slope under the cover of white camouflage. But everything is quiet. No sentries to avoid, no usual morning camp noises, and no voices carrying on the wind. So they keep climbing. Once they reach the plateau, they see nothing but a landscape of sheer devastation, where every Soviet soldier lay dead, their bodies strewn across the ground. Some dead as they fought, some dead as they ran. The scene defies logic. The only sure conclusion is the viciousness of the fight. Some bodies have deep gashes from what appear to be claws and puncture wounds from fangs. Some bodies are literally torn limb from limb, while the snow is more red than white. But then there are some bodies in the snow with no signs of any trauma, just a frozen death mask of horror. Hundreds of spent shell casings carpet the area, leaving no doubt that some of the soldiers fought hard against their attacker. However, a number of the men showed signs of self-inflicted wounds, with bullets to the head or chest. Tents lay in shreds, equipment thrown around by an obviously strong force, but no traces of an attacking party. No boot prints from Finnish troops, no casings from enemy weapons, and no indication of a large force approaching or withdrawing through the pristine snow. Experienced hunters and trackers among the scouts scour the site for any clues as to what could have done this, but they found nothing. No tracks or fur from wolves or bears. The Karelian region does have lynx, wolverines, and boar, any one of which could kill a lone person, but not an entire company. And even an entire pack of starving wolves would have sustained some kind of casualties trying to take on that many men. And the fear frozen on the faces now staring blankly to the sky suggests something more than an animal. Trackers traced the soldiers' tracks in the snow. By the looks of it, a few of them tried running away, but the boot prints would just stop with no signs of them reversing course. They just vanished. The air retains a sharp, metallic ozone scent reminiscent of an impending storm, and a slight hum still hangs in the air. One scout of Sami descent later describes a profound sensation of being watched by the Sadit stones themselves. And the Finns decide it's time to go. Their discovery is relayed back to Finnish headquarters, but headquarters has their hands full with everything else going on, so they seemingly just let the matter drop, most likely with advice from local Sami volunteers in their ranks, warning them to just let it go. Since at the time, Russian army units were not necessarily a fixed number of men, and no one knows exactly how many men marched up that hill 2 days earlier, no one knows how many men died and how many managed to survive. Unlike the Finns, the Soviet military paid attention. The loss of the company is immediately classified at the highest levels, and the entire area is flagged as a no-go zone on military maps with no rationale provided. In Stalin's Russia, there's no room for weakness of any kind, so the official narrative paints the division as victims of a heroic but overwhelming Finnish ambush, complete with posthumous medals for officers to craft a story of sacrifice rather than mystery. Behind closed doors, however, Russian commanders are profoundly disturbed. The injuries don't look like your typical battlefield injuries, and the lack of any enemy casualties defies logic. Communications in the following weeks order all nearby units to reroute without cause, giving the mountain plenty of space. Apparently, there are a handful of survivors who are separated and dispatched to distant hospitals far from the front, their medical records listing diagnoses from combat fatigue to delusional psychosis, with treatments aimed more at shutting them up than fixing their trauma. But it's from them that we have their consistent accounts of the thickening air, the growing primal fear that bypass rational thought, followed by chittering sounds that scrambled coherent thinking, and then the full onslaught of whatever was waiting in the mist. As the war presses on, Soviet forces leverage their numerical superiority to grind down Finnish resistance, culminating in the Moscow Peace Treaty of March 13, 1940, which forces Finland to cede the Karelian Isthmus and other territories. The mountain acquires the grim nickname of Death Mountain among Russian troops and civilians who give it a wide berth after that, while Sami descendants continue their quiet rituals to appease the guardians and prevent any more disturbances. In the years since, the area's peculiarities have drawn occasional explorers and researchers who report lingering sensations of isolation, a chill that goes to the bone no matter what you're wearing, and compasses that sometimes spin erratically, and the occasional hum that can be heard during extreme cold snaps. Okay, that is a pretty wild ride. But let's take a step back and just go through some of the logical explanations that have been offered up to explain this one. Let's start with the most logical. Animal attack. A large pack of wolves, driven to desperation by an unusually severe winter and disrupted reindeer migrations, might explain some of the claw and fang wounds. Eurasian wolves hunt in groups of up to 25, and if they're hungry enough, will turn to the nearest human. But no wolf remains are found at the scene, and such a coordinated assault on 100 armed men without leaving tracks or without one of them being killed in the attack is highly unlikely. Well, what about a bear attack? Well, they don't hunt in packs, and a lone bear is going to shy away from a large group of people unless provoked. But no bear prints are found either. So, not a bear attack. Extreme cold and hypothermia could account for disorientation, hallucinations, and even paradoxical undressing, leading to them freezing to death, especially since the soldiers are not well equipped for the extreme cold. How can Russians not be equipped for extreme cold? But the soldiers had already gotten their tents up and had fires going. They had shelter and heat. And the injuries recorded go way beyond frostbite damage, including deliberate defensive wounds and the evidence of organized, if futile, resistance pointing to an external enemy. It could have been an accident. Maybe the dense mist and foreign forest noises made their trigger fingers a little itchy. Maybe someone saw somebody in the shadows and panicked with friendly fire and grenades thrown in the confusion. Except that the weapons showed discharge in omnidirectional panic rather than targeted exchanges. Another part of the accident theory is that carbon monoxide poisoning from tightly sealed tents and faulty stoves in the freezing night might have caused confusion through toxic buildup, explaining the irrational behavior. But that theory, never mind the idea that 1939 tents could seal well enough to cause a high enough gas buildup, Doesn't account for the extensive physical trauma and their equipment being flung all over the place by something with muscle. Yet another theory down the environment path is that maybe there was a sudden methane gas release from the thawing permafrost, inducing mass panic and turning soldiers against one another. Or infrasound generated by wind through the Sadies and trees, creating auditory hallucinations and anxiety that escalated into frenzy. Those are documented effects. That would account for the hum, the sense of dread, and even some self-harm. But it doesn't cover the extensive wounds that were not made by humans or the tracks made by those in a hurry to get somewhere else that just stop with no sign of them retracing their steps. Finnish folklore, deeply rooted in Sami traditions, gives us a couple of interesting candidates for the mayhem that do a way better job of accounting for all of the evidence. The Metsähaltija, or forest guardian, protects the wilderness from disrespectful intruders by confusing travelers, leading them astray, or meting out direct punishment through ethereal means. They can manifest as fluid shadows or animal-like apparitions and evoke primal terror without leaving tracks, which exactly matches the reports of quick-moving shapes and an overwhelming sense of being hunted by something not human. Now, while the Metsähaltija might just lead you in circles for chopping down a sacred tree, the Ayatar, the devil's daughter of the forest, brings plague, madness, and death with a single scream. For the few Soviet soldiers who lived long enough to speak, whatever hunted them that night wasn't content with scaring them away. It wanted them broken and dead. Local Sami accounts predating the war described the stretch of forest around Vottovaara as a bad place, avoided by hunters, where strange sounds echo at night and the air shifts palpably, suggesting the location itself harbors qualities recognized for generations as a threshold where spirits can cross. Well, what about psychological warfare by the Finns? Wouldn't be the first time, and it's a great way to narrow the fighting force gap. The US did it in the Philippines after World War II. If you want to learn more about that fun little adventure, a link to the video will be in the description. The Finns could have made sure the stories of Metsähaltija and Ayatar made their way through the ranks of the out-of-towners before they climbed the mountain. Once that terrifying seed is sown, it's pretty easy to feed that terror with ghost-like ski raids, maybe prop up frozen corpses as warnings, and make a few eerie animal calls to mimic the supernatural. Pair that with the forest itself oozing a sense of isolation, and you've got a mere suggestion spiraling into collective hysteria. Yet the absence of Finnish records claiming credit, the physical evidence not being aligned with human tactics, and the survivors' uniform testimonies suggest something going on that's more than just amped up fear. More contemporary supernatural theories propose interdimensional crossovers at thin veil sites like Vottovaara, where the intense energies of warfare combined with the environmental extremes weaken reality's barriers, allowing entities, either spiritual or extraterrestrial, from other planes to emerge, manifesting as the shadows and hum and creating all kinds of mayhem. I guess at this point, anything is possible. And that leads us to our last possibility group, some kind of cryptid. Considering that Finland is the most forested country in Europe by percentage, with about 75% of the country being trees, you would think that this would be a Bigfoot haven. But Try as I might, I could not find any reports of anything coming from anywhere close to there other than a whisper of a few folklore-related sightings and a report of a humanoid figure around the St. Petersburg area that I can't find a source for. Thanks for nothing, Grok. So at this point, I would put far more money on a visit from Ayatar than I would on Sasquatch. I do think it's interesting that this incident shares creepy parallels with some of the crazy stories we've talked about before, like the Dyatlov Pass, where in 1959, 9 experienced Russian hikers tear out of their tent into lethal temperatures, barefoot, their bodies scattered with injuries like crushed skulls and missing organs, but no external trauma, a lot like those at Vottovaara. Or even the Battle of Los Angeles in 1942, where American anti-aircraft guns unleash over 1,400 shells at what they think are Japanese planes over the city, yet no wreckage ever hits the ground and no enemy claims responsibility. Which is kind of like the Russians firing at targets they can't see with no signs of an enemy ever being there. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll put the links for those in the description too. In the end, the Vottovaara incident lingers as one of the Winter War's most perplexing footnotes, where human will went toe-to-toe with ancient forces and was brought down not by bullets or ice, but by something that didn't even leave a footprint. This one gives me the creeps through and through. Just the sheer brutality of it. I would love to go there and see those crazy rock formations, but I will make sure to let the mountain spirits know that I come in peace before I set foot on that mountain. If you would like the thrill of another chill down your spine that is not related to a Finnish winter, click right here. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.